The cafe was buzzing with energy, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixing with the chatter of customers. Isabella adjusted her sleek designer dress as she scrolled through her phone, barely paying attention to her surroundings. She was here for a quick break before heading to her next social event. She glanced up and noticed a man standing a few feet away, nervously clutching a book. His clothes were simple, slightly worn, and his face, well, it wasn't the kind that turned heads. His uneven features and slightly awkward posture made him seem out of place in the upscale cafe. Isabella barely spared him a second glance. She was used to a certain type of man: sharp suits, confident smiles, a polished appearance. This man was the complete opposite. When he hesitantly stepped forward, as if gathering the courage to approach her, she instinctively tensed. The last thing she needed was to entertain someone who didn't fit into her world. "Excuse me." His voice was deep but unsure, his eyes warm with sincerity. "I think you dropped this." He held out a silk scarf. Hers. She hadn't even realized it had slipped from her purse. Instead of gratitude, her expression remained neutral, almost cold. "Oh. Thanks," she muttered, taking it quickly without making eye contact. She was already looking at her phone again, hoping he would take the hint and walk away. But he didn't. "My name is Adrian," he said, a small, hopeful smile playing on his lips. I've seen you around here before. I was wondering if maybe you'd like to—" Before he could finish, Isabella let out a soft, disinterested sigh. She had heard this a million times before. Random men trying to strike up a conversation, thinking they had a chance just because they dared to speak. "Look, Adrian," she interrupted, still not fully looking at him. "I appreciate the gesture, but I'm kind of in the middle of something." She waved her phone slightly as if that explained everything. Adrian hesitated, his confidence wavering. He wasn't oblivious. He could see it in her eyes. She had judged him instantly, dismissed him before he even got a chance. He had hoped that maybe, just maybe, she would see past appearances. But now, standing there with her barely acknowledging his presence, reality sank in. "Right. Of course," he nodded, his voice quiet. "Sorry to bother you." As he turned to leave, Isabella finally looked up. There was something in his expression, a flicker of disappointment, of quiet acceptance. For a split second, a strange feeling twisted inside her. But she quickly pushed it aside. What did it matter? He wasn't her type. He wasn't someone she would ever consider. Moments later, her best friend, Lily, slid into the seat across from her. "Who was that?" Lily asked, eyeing Adrian as he walked away. "Just some guy." Isabella shrugged. "Nothing important." Lily smirked. "He seemed kinda sweet." "Sweet doesn't count for much," Isabella replied dismissively. "Not in the real world." Lily raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The conversation quickly shifted to their upcoming plans, and soon, Adrian was nothing more than a forgotten interaction. But for Adrian, that moment stayed with him. As he walked out of the cafe, he clenched the book in his hands. He had been foolish to think she would see him differently. This was just another reminder of where he stood in the world. Overlooked, underestimated, unworthy in the eyes of people like her. But what Isabella didn't know was that fate had a way of changing everything. And soon, she would realize just how wrong she had been. Her life was a carefully curated image, every outfit selected for perfection, every event attended to maintain status, and every romantic choice dictated by appearances. Isabella never questioned it. In her world, love wasn't about connection or understanding. It was about compatibility, about looking good together, about making the right choice. That's why, when she dismissed Adrian in the cafe, she didn't think twice. He was kind, sure. But kindness didn't turn heads. It didn't make for glamorous Instagram photos. It didn't make people envy you. What did was someone like Ethan Montgomery, tall, charming, effortlessly attractive. He was the definition of a catch, the man every woman in their circle secretly, or not so secretly, wanted. And he had chosen Isabella. She still remembered the first time Ethan had asked her out. It was at an elite charity gala, where the city's wealthiest and most influential gathered. She had been standing with her friends, a glass of champagne in hand, when Ethan casually slid into the conversation. "You know, Isabella, I've been meaning to ask, how have you managed to stay single all this time?" His smile was confident, his voice smooth. The compliment was wrapped in just enough flirtation to make her feel special. "Maybe I was waiting for someone worth my time," she had teased back, her smile practiced and perfect. He had laughed, easy and relaxed, before asking her out. And just like that, her answer was yes. Why wouldn't it be? He was everything a woman like her was supposed to want. From that moment on, Isabella had fallen into a fairy tale, or at least, the version of one she believed in. Fancy dinner dates at exclusive restaurants, weekends spent at luxury resorts, pictures that racked up thousands of likes. Every time she posted a shot of her and Ethan together, the comments flooded in. "You two are perfect. Power couple goals. He's so handsome. Isabella, you're so lucky." Those comments reassured her. They validated her choice. Ethan fit the image. And in their world, image was everything. But there was something, small, barely noticeable at first, that felt off. It was the way their conversations always revolved around social events, business deals, and vacations, but never anything deeper. The way Ethan could be so affectionate in public, yet distant when they were alone. And the way he never really seemed interested in her thoughts, just her appearance. She ignored it. She had no reason to doubt her choice. Adrian, on the other hand, never crossed her mind again. Why would he? He wasn't part of her world. If someone had asked her about that cafe encounter, she probably wouldn't even remember his name. But Adrian remembered everything. That day had been a defining moment for him, not just because of Isabella's rejection, but because it reminded him of the world he had been born into, and the one he was determined to rise above. He had always known he looked different, that he wasn't the man women instantly gravitated toward. But what he lacked in conventional attractiveness, he made up for in something far greater: ambition, intelligence, resilience. And he had plans. Plans that would change everything. As Isabella continued living her picture-perfect life, Adrian was working in silence, building something extraordinary. And soon, the woman who had once ignored him wouldn't just notice him. She would regret ever looking past him. But for now, she remained blissfully unaware, still wrapped up in her shallow choice, still convinced she had made the right one. That illusion, however, was about to shatter. Adrian had always known that life wasn't going to be easy for him. The world didn't see him the way it saw Ethan Montgomery, or any of the other men who'd effortlessly earned the attention of women like Isabella. He wasn't tall, with the chiseled jawline and perfect smile that seemed to attract admiration with little effort. He didn't come from old money, nor did he wear suits that screamed wealth. His life had been a series of quiet struggles, living paycheck to paycheck, fighting to be noticed in a world where only the loudest voices were heard, and where success seemed reserved for those who already had everything. Yet, despite his humble beginnings, Adrian never lacked ambition. Deep down, he knew that his worth was not measured by how he looked or what he wore, but by the strength of his character, the fire in his belly, and the goals he set for himself. It was during one particularly rough period when Adrian had found himself reflecting on his life. He had just lost a second job in 6 months, and the uncertainty of his future was clouding his every thought. But instead of succumbing to despair, something inside him clicked. That was when he decided that he would no longer let life pass him by. He would take control. No more working jobs that didn't bring him closer to his dreams. No more waiting for an opportunity to present itself. He would create that opportunity. He would build his success. At first, the path wasn't easy. Adrian poured his heart into learning everything he could about business, technology, and finance. He spent nights studying, sacrificing sleep, while others partied and relaxed. He took on odd jobs, not for the money but for the skills he would acquire, and slowly, piece by piece, he started to build his empire. His first break came when he teamed up with a small group of like-minded individuals to launch a tech startup. The early days were grueling. Countless hours spent coding, designing, and troubleshooting. But as the company began to gain traction, something incredible happened. Investors took notice. Adrian was no longer the quiet guy at the cafe who no one paid attention to. He was becoming someone who could make waves in the business world. As his startup grew, so did his reputation. People started to look at him differently. Where once he had been overlooked, he was now being sought after for advice, partnerships, and business ventures. And the best part? He hadn't had to change who he was. He wasn't trying to fit into a mold. He had built his success from the ground up, on his terms. In just a few short years, Adrian's tech company had reached the point where it was being valued at millions. He was no longer struggling, he was thriving. It wasn't just the financial success that mattered to him, though. What truly motivated Adrian was the knowledge that he had overcome every obstacle that life had thrown at him. He had proved that anyone, regardless of their background or appearance, could achieve greatness with the right mindset and determination. And now, Adrian was ready for the next chapter of his journey. He had built his wealth, his company, and his reputation. But there was someone, he still needed to confront. Isabella. The woman who had dismissed him for not being good enough. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to intersect with his again. Only this time, the tables would be turned. She would no longer have the luxury of overlooking him. Adrian had become everything she had once overlooked, and more. The man she thought she could simply dismiss was now someone who could make or break her career. She had no idea what was coming. And Adrian? He wasn't sure if he would ever forgive her for what she did. But he was about to find out if the revenge he had envisioned was truly what he wanted. Because in his journey to success, Adrian had discovered something about himself that he hadn't expected. True power wasn't in the wealth or status. It was in the ability to choose his path, regardless of what anyone else thought. Isabella sat at her desk, her eyes glued to the glowing screen in front of her. The news of Adrian's success had spread like wildfire. He was now one of the most talked about names in the tech industry, his company valued in the hundreds of millions. He wasn't just a successful businessman. He had become a symbol of resilience, a story that everyone admired. She had heard the rumors, the whispers about him turning into someone unrecognizable. But it wasn't just his wealth that had captured her attention. It was the way people spoke about him. They didn't just see a man with money. They saw someone who had overcome the odds, who had proved the world wrong. They saw someone with depth, with strength, and with an unwavering sense of self. And for the first time, Isabella began to question everything she had believed about love, about success, and herself. As a child, Isabella had always been taught to value appearances. In her world, being seen with the right people, having the right connections, and living in the right places was the only thing that mattered. She had always believed that the most important thing in life was securing wealth, status, and security. Adrian had never fit into that world. He wasn't born into wealth, didn't wear designer clothes, and certainly didn't have the polished charm that people like Ethan Montgomery had. To her, Adrian had always seemed like just another ordinary guy who couldn't possibly offer the kind of life she was looking for. She had never considered looking beneath the surface, never stopped to think about the person he was, or what he could become. But now, as she read the articles and saw the interviews, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had chosen Ethan, the polished, wealthy man who had all the right credentials, the right look, the right connections. But as she sat there, her thoughts drifting back to Adrian, she felt a pang of regret that she couldn't ignore. She had been so focused on the surface, so consumed by the idea of a perfect life, that she had missed something much more important. She had missed the chance to love someone who could have been more than just a stepping stone to a perfect future. Someone who could have truly understood her. Someone who had struggled just like she had, and who had fought to become more than the world had expected of him. Adrian wasn't just a man with a story. He was a man with a soul, with dreams, with passions, with the kind of depth that she had never fully appreciated. And now, as she sat there alone, with her life seemingly perfect on the outside, she realized that the thing she had been searching for all along was not money, not status, not luxury. It was love. Real love. The kind of love that wasn't tied to appearances or wealth, but the kind that was rooted in genuine connection, understanding, and respect. Isabella had always been drawn to the idea of love at first sight, the romanticized notion of finding someone who could sweep her off her feet and change her life. But as she sat reflecting on the man she had once overlooked, she realized that true love wasn't something that could be bought or found in a glance. It wasn't about finding someone who made you feel excited and glamorous. It was about finding someone who saw you for who you truly were, and accepted you in all your flaws and imperfections. It was about building something real, something lasting. Adrian had always treated her with kindness, with respect, and with an understanding that went beyond surface-level attraction. She had been too blinded by her ego and desire for a perfect life to see it. But now, with time and distance, she saw him in a new light. And it wasn't just Adrian's success that had changed everything. It was the realization that she had been living her life in the pursuit of the wrong things. She had chosen a life that was comfortable, secure, and predictable. But now, looking back, she understood that those things weren't what truly mattered. What mattered was the ability to grow, to learn, and to love freely. Adrian had done all of those things, and she had dismissed him. She had judged him based on what he lacked, not seeing all that he had to offer. In the months that followed, Isabella's perception of love began to shift. She started to see that love wasn't something you could predict or control. It wasn't something that could be planned or manipulated. It was messy, unpredictable, and often uncomfortable. But it was also the most beautiful thing in the world. And now she was beginning to wonder if it was too late to go after what her heart truly wanted. Her engagement to Ethan, once a symbol of stability and success, began to feel suffocating. Ethan was everything she thought she needed: rich, polished, charming. But with Adrian's transformation, her eyes were open to the possibility that she had been seeking the wrong kind of love all along. The man she had once dismissed as unworthy was now the one she found herself thinking about, the one whose success she admired, and the one whose heart she longed to win back. But was it too late? Could she undo the damage of her past mistakes? Isabella's days were filled with internal conflict. She knew she had to make a decision, but the weight of her choices left her frozen in place. Could she walk away from the life she had built with Ethan to follow her heart? Was it possible to find true happiness with someone like Adrian, after all the pain and distance between them? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing for certain. The love she had once overlooked had become the love she now craved. As the days passed, the more Isabella thought about Adrian, the more she realized that the life she had thought was perfect had begun to feel empty. Ethan had never truly seen her for who she was. He had never given her the space to grow or change. But Adrian had always encouraged her to be her authentic self, even when she didn't recognize it. He had believed in her before she believed in herself. Isabella finally understood that love, real love, wasn't about settling for what was safe. It was about taking risks, being vulnerable, and trusting in the unknown. And now, as she prepared to face the man she had once rejected, she knew that she had to take that risk, no matter the outcome. Isabella hadn't expected to see Adrian again. It had been months since the news of his rise to success had filled every corner of the media. And yet, here she was, standing in front of a cafe where she had always gone to clear her thoughts. She had been coming here for weeks now, hoping to find peace, hoping for answers. Little did she know, this would be the day her past would collide with her present, pulling her into an uncertain future. As she walked through the door, the familiar sound of the bell above the door chimed, and she instinctively looked up. That was when she saw him. Adrian. Standing near the counter, his posture confident yet relaxed, as if he belonged in this world, a stark contrast to the unsure man she had once known. He was no longer the same person she had dismissed all those months ago. The transformation was evident in the way he carried himself, in the sharpness of his gaze, and in the calm authority in his demeanor. It was impossible to ignore the magnetic pull he now had, as if his very presence demanded attention. For a moment, Isabella froze, caught between the past and the present. Her heart skipped a beat as the rush of emotions hit her all at once. It felt like a cruel twist of fate. She had spent so long trying to forget him, trying to bury the regrets that had followed her ever since she had let him go. But here he was, standing in front of her, looking like the very person she had once yearned for but thought she could never have. The man who had slipped through her fingers because she had chosen the wrong path. Adrian's eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second, it was as if time had stopped. He didn't look angry or bitter as she had expected. Instead, he looked calm, collected, and distant. The years of struggle and growth had shaped him into someone she didn't recognize, but he was still undeniably Adrian. She could see it in the way he carried himself, in the way he moved. There was no trace of the insecure man she had once known. He was no longer the man she had overlooked. For a moment, the weight of her actions seemed to crash down on her. She had let him go. Not once, but twice. Once for his lack of wealth, and again for the choices she had made in trying to secure her future. And now, as she stood there, facing the very man who had become everything she had ever dreamed of, the regret was suffocating. Isabella quickly looked away, trying to compose herself. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, the embarrassment threatening to spill over. But Adrian wasn't looking for a confrontation. He wasn't the same person she remembered. He seemed as composed as ever, as though their past was a mere chapter in a long-forgotten book. The man she had left behind was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to walk away from the pain, to grow beyond it. His success had allowed him to leave his past behind, but Isabella couldn't say the same. "Isabella," Adrian said, his voice steady, almost as if he had been expecting this encounter. She could hear the years of restraint in his tone, the way he had learned to hold himself together, even in the face of someone who had once been part of his broken heart. She looked up at him, her throat tight, the words stuck in her chest. What was she supposed to say? "I'm sorry. I made a mistake?" The truth was, no words could undo the damage she had caused. No apology could take away the years of missed opportunities, the missed moments that could have been hers. But it wasn't about that. Not anymore. Instead, Isabella simply nodded, her eyes refusing to meet his. She wasn't sure what she was expecting. An apology, perhaps, or an explanation for why he had kept his distance. But Adrian wasn't here for that. He was here, in this moment, for a reason. And Isabella realized that she wasn't the same person either. The woman who had once chosen a life of comfort and security over love and authenticity was no longer the woman standing before him. The path she had taken had taught her many things, but above all, it had taught her the value of real connections, the importance of vulnerability, and the beauty of second chances. "I never thought I'd see you here," Adrian continued, his voice softer now, the sharp edges of his words replaced with something gentler. "I thought you had moved on." Isabella could feel the weight of his words, the subtle challenge in his tone. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. But it felt like a question nonetheless. Had she moved on? Had she truly found happiness? Or had she been hiding behind the facade of a life that wasn't hers to begin with? "I have," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't help but wonder if I made the right choices." Adrian tilted his head slightly, his gaze intense as he studied her. It was as though he could see through her, through the walls she had built around herself. "You don't need to explain yourself to me, Isabella," he replied, his voice warm, devoid of bitterness. "I made my own choices, and I found peace with them. I've learned that everything happens for a reason, even the painful moments. Isabella swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. She hadn't expected him to be so understanding, so kind. After everything that had happened, after everything she had put him through, he was showing her grace. And it made her feel small in comparison, made her realize just how much she had lost, how much she had thrown away for the wrong reasons. "I'm sorry," she blurted out, the words spilling from her lips before she could stop them. "I shouldn't have chosen him over you. I was blinded by what I thought was the right choice. But I see now that I was wrong." Adrian gave a small smile, though it wasn't the kind of smile that celebrated her apology. It was a smile of understanding, of someone who had already forgiven. "It's okay, Isabella," he said gently. "You don't need to apologize. We all have our journeys, our lessons to learn, and sometimes we have to walk away from the things we think we want to find the things we truly need." Isabella took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. She had come to this cafe seeking answers, but she hadn't expected to find them here, in the form of Adrian. Someone she had once dismissed, someone she had thought was beneath her. But here he was, standing in front of her as a man she now respected, someone who had learned to rise above the pain and make something of himself. And for the first time, Isabella realized that love wasn't about the grand gestures, the material things, or the perfect timeline. It was about accepting each other, flaws and all, and finding the strength to move forward together, even when the past seemed impossible to overcome. "Maybe we can start over," Isabella suggested hesitantly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Maybe we can find a new way forward." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Then, with a small nod, he replied, "I think that sounds like a good idea." And just like that, the path that once seemed lost now felt open again, full of possibilities. Their chance encounter had sparked something neither of them had expected. A new beginning. A new chapter that held the promise of love, redemption, and second chances. Isabella stood there, frozen in the same spot, watching Adrian as he took a sip of his coffee, as though the world had not just collided with her past. He had no visible reaction to her apology, no signs of anger, frustration, or even a flicker of surprise. His face was expressionless, and it only made Isabella feel more exposed, more vulnerable. What was she expecting? A burst of emotion? A moment of clarity, perhaps? Maybe a part of her was hoping for him to show some sign that the Adrian she once knew still cared, even after everything. But he didn't. He wasn't the same person. As the silence stretched on, Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't how she had imagined this meeting going. She had thought that by apologizing, by acknowledging the pain she had caused, she would somehow find a way to mend the broken pieces between them. But Adrian wasn't reacting. He wasn't showing any of the emotion she had expected. He seemed almost detached, almost indifferent. For a fleeting moment, Isabella considered leaving, but her feet were firmly planted on the floor. She had come here seeking closure, seeking forgiveness. But she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to be so unaffected. Adrian finally put down his cup and looked at her, his gaze steady and calm. "I heard what you said," he started, his voice as neutral as ever. "But I don't think it matters." The words hit her harder than she had anticipated. They weren't angry words, nor were they laced with bitterness. No. Adrian spoke to them as if they were facts, as if the past was nothing more than a distant memory, one that no longer held any significance to him. "I've moved on, Isabella," he continued, his tone still calm. "I've learned to let go of things, people, and even emotions that no longer serve me. What happened between us is in the past, and it stays there. I'm not angry with you. I'm not even disappointed. I'm just indifferent." The indifference in his voice struck her like a blow to the chest. How could he be so distant? How could he say he had moved on when, for her, everything felt like it had come to a head? She had spent countless nights regretting her decision, replaying the moments in her mind, wondering if there was a way she could have taken it all back. But here he was, standing in front of her, completely unaffected by the mess she had made of both their lives. "How can you say that?" Isabella whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "How can you be so cold? After everything we had? After everything I did to you? Don't you feel anything? Don't you care?" Adrian's eyes softened just a little, but his expression remained mostly unchanged. "I care, Isabella," he said quietly, "but not in the way you're thinking. I've learned that caring doesn't mean holding on to the past. It doesn't mean drowning in regret or resentment. I've come to understand that sometimes you have to let things go to grow. And that includes the people who have hurt you. I've forgiven you, but I've also moved on." Isabella was taken aback. Forgiveness? She had expected him to lash out, to demand answers, to scream at her for what she had done. But forgiveness? It didn't make sense. It didn't match what she had expected. How could he forgive her so easily? How could he simply let go of the pain she had caused? "But I hurt you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I abandoned you. I chose someone else over you. I turned my back on you. How can you forgive that?" Adrian's eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a flicker of something deeper in them. Something that hinted at the man he had once been. But even that fleeting emotion was quickly masked by the calm, composed exterior he had built over the years. "I forgive you because I had to," he replied. "Not for you, but for me. Holding on to anger, holding on to pain, it doesn't help anyone. It only holds you back. You made your choice. I made mine. And I can't keep living in the past. I had to move on, not just for my peace of mind, but for my future. The person I am now is different from the man I was before, and that's because I chose to forgive, to forget, and to grow." The words lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Isabella felt a deep ache in her chest, realizing that she was still stuck in the past. She was still clinging to the mistakes, the regrets, the what-ifs. But Adrian had already moved on. He had chosen to let go, to rise above the hurt and build a life without her in it. "You're right," Isabella said quietly, her voice full of sorrow. "I've been stuck in the past, trying to rewrite our story, trying to fix what I broke. But I realize now that I can't. I can't change what happened. And I can't make you feel the way I want you to." Adrian gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that wasn't cruel or mocking. It was a smile of understanding, a smile that conveyed a sense of finality. "Exactly," he said softly. "And that's okay. You've learned your lesson, Isabella. I've learned mine too. Sometimes people change, and the love they once shared isn't enough to keep them together. But that doesn't mean we should live in regret. It just means we have to accept it and keep moving forward." For a moment, Isabella didn't know what to say. She had wanted him to feel something, anything, to show her that there was still a chance for them. But there was nothing. There was only this: his indifference, his acceptance of what had happened, and his calm detachment. It hurt more than she had expected. But she also knew deep down that this was what she needed to hear. She needed to hear that he was okay, that he had found peace with the past. "I'm sorry, Adrian," she whispered again, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything I did." Adrian nodded once, acknowledging her apology. But there was no need for more words. The silence between them wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. It was a peaceful kind of silence, one that carried with it the weight of everything they had been through. He had forgiven her, but he had also closed the chapter on their past, and he wasn't looking back. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Isabella," Adrian said, standing up and giving her a final, lingering glance. But I won't be a part of it. Not anymore. As he turned and walked away, Isabella felt a strange sense of closure wash over her. It was as if the final thread connecting her to him had been severed, and she was left standing there with only the remnants of their past. Adrian had moved on, and now it was her turn to do the same. Isabella couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that seemed to follow her wherever she went. The conversation with Adrian had left her raw, vulnerable, and exposed. She had expected anger, frustration, maybe even some bitterness, but all she had received was indifference. And that, in its way, was far worse than anything she could have imagined. Adrian had moved on, and now it was as if she didn't even matter to him anymore. The days that followed felt like an endless blur. She tried to immerse herself in work, trying to focus on her job, but the thought of Adrian kept creeping back into her mind. Every interaction, every moment of silence, reminded her of the gap between them, the vast chasm of time and mistakes that seemed impossible to bridge. And yet, she couldn't let go. The need to fix things, to make things right, gnawed at her constantly. At night, when she lay awake in her bed, her mind replayed the scene over and over again. His calm indifference, his lack of emotion, and his decision to move on. It all haunted her. How could he be so at peace with it? How could he simply walk away from their past, from everything they had shared? She had made mistakes, yes. She had chosen the wrong path. But hadn't she suffered enough? Didn't she deserve a chance to make it right? The next time she saw him, a part of her hoped that the meeting would go differently. Maybe he would see the sincerity in her eyes, hear the regret in her voice, and realize that she had changed. Maybe he would forgive her. But deep down, she knew that wasn't likely. Adrian wasn't the type to hold on to the past, and she wasn't sure if she was even worthy of his forgiveness. As luck would have it, Isabella ran into Adrian at a local cafe one morning. It was a small, quiet place, with only a few people scattered around, sipping their drinks. Adrian was seated at a corner table, his back to the window, and for a moment, Isabella hesitated. Should she approach him? Was it too soon? Would he even want to see her? But there was something inside her that pushed her forward. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was desperation. She couldn't quite tell. But she couldn't let the opportunity slip away. She needed to try again, even if it meant swallowing her pride and putting herself in an uncomfortable position. After all, what did she have to lose? She walked over to his table, her heart racing in her chest. Adrian looked up as she approached, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no warmth in his gaze, no spark of recognition or joy, just a cool, distant look that made Isabella's heart drop. "Adrian," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect to see you here." He gave a small nod, acknowledging her presence, but didn't offer any further greeting. He seemed completely at ease, as if their past had never existed. Isabella swallowed hard, feeling a wave of frustration wash over her. Why was he so calm? Why was he so unaffected? "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she began, her voice shaky. "But I need to say something. I need to explain myself." Adrian set his coffee cup down slowly, his eyes studying her intently. "Isabella, I don't think there's anything left to explain." The words stung more than she expected. She had hoped for at least a little warmth, a little compassion. But instead, she was met with his firm resolve. There was no sign of the man she once knew, the one who had cared about her, the one who had loved her. There was only a man who had moved on, who had buried everything they had shared deep within the past. "No," she said, shaking her head, her voice growing more urgent. "Please, just hear me out. I know I messed up. I made the wrong choice and I hurt you. But I've changed. I've learned. I'm not the same person I was before." Adrian's gaze didn't waver, but he didn't respond immediately. The silence between them stretched out, thick and heavy, as if he were weighing her words carefully. Finally, he spoke. "Isabella, I don't doubt that you've changed," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change how I feel about it. I've forgiven you. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to forget. And it certainly doesn't mean I'm going to put myself back in the same situation." His words were like a slap to her face, but they were the truth. She had been hoping for something more, something that would give her a second chance. But it seemed that Adrian was done with their past, done with her. "I get it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I do. But I need you to understand something. I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were. I'm not asking for your love, not like that. I want a chance to prove that I've changed, to prove that I'm worthy of being in your life again, even if it's just as a friend." Adrian sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Isabella could tell that he was thinking, processing her words. It was clear that he wasn't completely closed off, but at the same time, he wasn't willing to let her back in so easily. He had built walls that she had helped create, and now she had to find a way to tear them down. "You've had your chance, Isabella," Adrian said quietly. "You had the chance to choose me, and you chose someone else. I'm not angry, but I'm also not going to let you come back into my life just because you're feeling regret now. If you want to prove yourself, it won't be by begging for my attention or my forgiveness. It will be by showing that you've learned from your mistakes and that you're capable of respecting the choices I've made for my own life." The harshness of his words hit her hard, but deep down, she knew he was right. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. She had to find a way to prove that she was more than the girl who had chosen looks over substance, that she had evolved into someone capable of real, lasting change. Isabella stood there, her hands shaking slightly. She had expected this conversation to go differently, but she was slowly realizing that Adrian wasn't going to give her an easy out. He wasn't going to let her slide back into his life simply because she was sorry. She had to work for it, and it wasn't going to be easy. But maybe that was the point. Maybe that was the test she needed to pass if she truly wanted to prove herself. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I understand. I'll prove it to you, Adrian. I'll prove that I've changed. And if you're ever willing to give me a chance, any chance, I'll be here." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Adrian behind. But this time, she didn't feel defeated. She felt a spark of determination, a fire in her belly that told her she wasn't done yet. She had a long way to go, but this was the first step. And for the first time in a long while, she was ready to take it. Isabella's world came crashing down in an instant. It was a typical Tuesday morning, but she could never have prepared herself for the phone call she received at 10:30 a.m. The cafe where she worked had experienced a catastrophic breakdown. The kitchen's main oven had malfunctioned, causing a fire that had destroyed part of the kitchen and left the restaurant temporarily closed. The fire department had been called, but the damage was done. The restaurant was not only financially crippled by the damage, but its reputation had also taken a serious blow. The news spread quickly, and within hours there were online posts, media reports, and reviews flooding in, many of them filled with judgment and criticism. Isabella had spent years building the restaurant's reputation. To see it all fall apart was devastating. She felt a sense of helplessness that gripped her chest. She had no idea how to fix it, how to save the restaurant or even the livelihoods of her co-workers, let alone her future. As she stood in the middle of the wreckage, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her manager, informing her that the insurance claim process would be long and tedious, and in the meantime, the cafe would be forced to remain closed for at least 2 months. The future of the cafe, and possibly her future, hung in the balance. She had never felt so lost. Her first instinct was to try to reach out to anyone who might help. She immediately tried to contact the owner, Adrian. Her mind raced with thoughts of how she could fix this, but she was quickly reminded of how little leverage she had. She hadn't even gotten a chance to apologize properly after their last conversation. He had made it clear that their past was closed, and he wasn't interested in rekindling anything between them. But at that moment, Isabella knew that she had no other choice. She needed his help. She dialed Adrian's number, her hands trembling slightly. After what felt like an eternity, he finally picked up. Isabella? His voice was cold, distant, and she could hear the disinterest in his tone. Adrian, she said, her voice shaky but determined. I need your help. The restaurant, there's been a fire, and it's a mess. It's going to take months to recover, and I don't know what to do. I can't lose this place. It's my responsibility, and I can't do it alone. There was a long silence on the other end. She held her breath, hoping for a sign that he would respond. But when he spoke again, his words were not what she expected. Isabella, I don't think you understand. I've moved on. I've got my own life, my own business. I'm sorry about the cafe, but I'm not in a position to help you. The words stung more than she could have imagined. She had hoped for something different, some kind of compassion, some acknowledgement of their past. But there was nothing. The coldness in his voice made it clear that he had long since let go of whatever connection they once had. Isabella felt the weight of his rejection, but she wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't. She knew that if she didn't act fast, the restaurant, the life she had worked so hard to build, would be gone for good. With a final plea, she spoke again. Please, Adrian. If there's anything you can do, anything at all, I'm begging you. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, in a tone that surprised her, Adrian spoke again. I'll come by tomorrow, he said flatly. But I'm doing this because it's business, not because of you. Isabella's heart sank. She didn't care about his reasons. She just knew that this was her last chance. She didn't know how Adrian would help, or what the next day would bring. But she was grateful for his willingness to even consider it. The next day, Isabella waited for Adrian at the cafe, the feeling of anxiety building in her chest. She didn't know what to expect. Would he offer a loan to help with the repairs? Would he take charge of the situation? Or would he simply walk away, leaving her to fend for herself? When Adrian arrived, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. He immediately began inspecting the damage, walking through the charred remains of the kitchen, his face unreadable. Isabella followed him, unsure of what to say or do. His business acumen was evident as he analyzed the damage, mentally calculating the costs and the potential solutions. After what felt like hours, Adrian finally turned to her. You're lucky the damage isn't as bad as it could have been, he said, his tone businesslike. But even so, it's going to take time and money to fix. You'll need a solid plan if you're going to make this work. Isabella nodded, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the situation. I know. I don't have a plan, Adrian. I don't even know where to start. Adrian paused, as if considering her words. All right, he said finally. I'll help, but it's going to be a partnership. You can't do this alone, and you'll need to prove that you're serious about this, that you're willing to put in the work. You'll need to swallow your pride and ask for help from the right people. I'm not going to hold your hand through this, but I will guide you if you're willing to follow my lead. Isabella's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and determination. Adrian wasn't giving her a free ride. He wasn't offering charity, but he was offering an opportunity, a chance to prove herself and rebuild what had been lost. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in weeks, Isabella felt a flicker of hope. The weeks that followed were some of the most difficult and exhausting of Isabella's life. She worked tirelessly, alongside Adrian, to come up with a recovery plan. She spent hours with contractors, coordinating repairs and making sure that everything was in order. But through it all, Adrian remained focused, pushing her to give her best. He didn't offer words of encouragement, but his silent support was enough. And through it all, Isabella began to see the man Adrian had become. He was no longer the arrogant, indifferent figure he had been before. His experience, his strength, and his ability to stay calm under pressure were qualities that she admired and respected. As the restaurant slowly began to come back to life, Isabella couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in her feelings towards Adrian. She had always thought that their connection had been lost forever, but as they worked together side by side, she began to realize something. Maybe it wasn't just about saving the cafe. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for them. And Adrian? He seemed to be softening too. He wasn't the same man who had walked away months ago. There was something more in his gaze when he looked at her now. Something unspoken. Something that hinted at the possibility of a new beginning. For the first time in a long while, Isabella felt like she was on the verge of something meaningful. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Adrian's help, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay in their path. Together, they could rebuild the restaurant. And maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something else as well. Isabella sat in the quiet of the cafe, her fingers nervously tapping the surface of the table. The familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee no longer brought her comfort. The weight of her past mistakes loomed over her, heavy and suffocating. She had thought that time would heal the wounds, that distance would somehow make everything right. But as she watched Adrian walk through the door, the reality hit her harder than ever. He was the same man she had wronged, the same man whose heart she had broken with her careless choices. Adrian's presence felt like a storm in the calm of her thoughts. His piercing gaze landed on her, and for a brief moment, she felt as though the room itself was closing in. She had been avoiding this moment for months, hoping that time would erase the memories, hoping that she wouldn't have to face the consequences of her actions. But here he was, standing in front of her. And she couldn't hide from the truth any longer. The truth that she had pushed him away, that she had chosen her pride and shallow desires over the man who had once cared for her deeply. She had made a mistake, one that could never be undone. Adrian's eyes were guarded, his posture stiff. The walls he had built around himself were impenetrable. Isabella couldn't tell if the coldness she felt in the air was just her imagination, or if it was a reflection of the space that had grown between them. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but now that it was here, she was at a loss. How could she possibly make him understand? How could she explain that the decision she had made to walk away from him had haunted her every day since? How could she make him see that she had changed, that she had learned the hard way that superficial things didn't matter? That the man she had once dismissed was the one who had truly mattered all along? Adrian crossed his arms, his gaze never leaving hers. There was a sharpness to his eyes that she had never seen before, and it made her heart ache. The arrogance, the indifference, it was all still there, but now it was laced with something deeper, something more painful. He had been hurt, and it was clear that the wound hadn't healed. Isabella knew that the road to redemption wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't sure if Adrian was even willing to listen. Adrian. Her voice trembled as she spoke his name. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance, but please. I need you to know how sorry I am. I made a terrible mistake when I chose to walk away from you. I was so caught up in my own insecurities and shallow desires that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. You were always there. Always offering me something real. Something genuine. And I ignored it. I thought I could find happiness elsewhere. But all I've found is emptiness. I've realized now that you were the one I should have fought for. The one I should have never let go. There was a brief flicker in Adrian's expression, a crack in the cold facade he had built. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He remained silent, his arms still crossed. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. The silence between them was unbearable. She could feel the weight of her regret crushing her, suffocating her every word. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. I know I hurt you, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away, if ever. But I need you to understand that I've changed. I'm not the same person I was when I walked away from you. I've learned so much about myself, about life, about what matters. And what matters now is you. I can't undo the past, but I want to do whatever it takes to make things right. Please, don't close the door on us. The words hung in the air, heavy and vulnerable. Isabella's hands were trembling as she waited for Adrian's response. The uncertainty was unbearable. Would he open his heart again? Would he even give her a chance to prove that she had changed? Or had the damage she had caused been too much to repair? Adrian took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of emotion in his gaze that made Isabella's breath catch. He exhaled slowly, his voice low but steady. Isabella, do you know what it feels like to be cast aside? To be told that you're not good enough, that you're not worth fighting for? That's what you did to me. That's what you made me feel. And it wasn't just a momentary thing. It was a deep, lasting wound. I gave you everything I had, and you threw it all away. And now, after all this time, you expect me to forgive you just like that? His words hit her like a punch to the gut. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and it was a pain she had caused. Isabella's heart shattered as she listened to him speak. She had never fully understood the weight of her actions, but now, hearing the raw emotion in his voice, she realized just how much damage she had done. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she whispered, her voice cracking. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking you to give me a chance, to give us a chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Adrian's gaze softened ever so slightly, but there was still a hesitation in his eyes. He was torn, and Isabella could see it. The hurt was still fresh, still raw. But there was something else there too. A flicker of hope. A flicker of the man he had once been. The man who had loved her with everything he had. After what felt like an eternity, Adrian finally spoke. I'm not sure if I can forgive you, Isabella. The pain you caused. It's not something I can just forget. But maybe we can start over. Maybe we can work through this together. But it's going to take time. A lot of time. Isabella's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. It wasn't the full forgiveness she had hoped for, but it was a start. She had been given a chance to prove herself, to rebuild what they had lost, and she wasn't going to waste it. I'll wait, she said softly, for as long as it takes. I'm not going anywhere. Adrian nodded slowly, the tension between them easing ever so slightly. There was still a long road ahead of them, a road filled with uncertainty and challenges. But for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt like they had a chance to heal, a chance to rebuild, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to find their way back to each other. The grand ballroom was filled with an air of excitement as the city's elite gathered for the charity gala. The glimmering chandeliers reflected the sparkling gowns and tuxedos of the attendees, while the sounds of soft music and laughter echoed throughout the venue. But amidst the glamour and prestige, Isabella's heart raced with nervous anticipation. Tonight was the night she had been dreading and longing for all at once. It had taken everything in her to get to this point. Everything to face Adrian again, to come to terms with the pain and the past they shared. But now, as they stood amid a crowd that was unaware of the emotional turmoil they had been through, the stakes felt higher than ever. Adrian stood beside her, looking every bit the confident, successful man he had become. His demeanor was calm and composed, but Isabella could sense the undercurrent of tension that simmered between them. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of awkward meetings, tentative steps toward reconciliation, and emotional conversations in the quiet corners of their shared past. They had started rebuilding, but there was still so much that hadn't been said, so much that needed to be acknowledged, publicly. The moment was inevitable. Adrian had invited her to the gala, and as much as she had tried to shy away from the spotlight, She knew it was his way of showing the world that he was no longer the man he had been when they first met. This night was about more than just charity. It was about claiming their future, and perhaps even putting the past to rest. "Are you ready?" Adrian's voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to look at him, the man who had been both her greatest regret and, in the last few weeks, the possibility of her second chance. His eyes, though guarded, seemed to soften when they met hers, as though the years of hurt and uncertainty were slowly being peeled away layer by layer. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be," Isabella replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty, but also resolve. The weight of the evening pressed down on her. This was more than just a gala. This was their moment to step into the light as a couple, to let go of their history and create a new narrative, one where they would face the world together. As the evening wore on, the guests mingled and sipped champagne, unaware of the storm brewing between Isabella and Adrian. The evening unfolded in a blur of conversation and laughter, but Isabella could hardly focus on anything other than the upcoming moment when she would have to stand before everyone, admit her past mistakes, and reveal the truth about her feelings. Then, it came. The announcement. The charity auction had ended, and Adrian was invited to say a few words about the evening's success. As he stepped onto the stage, the spotlight fell on him, and for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt her breath catch. She had always known him to be a confident speaker, but tonight, there was something different in his presence. It wasn't just his wealth or status that commanded attention. It was the way he held himself now, the way he seemed so at peace with who he had become. It was the man who had walked away from the past and was now taking control of his future. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian's voice rang out, clear and powerful. "Thank you all for being here tonight and making this event such a success. But I'd like to take a moment to speak about something very personal to me." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She knew what was coming. The moment had arrived, the words she had dreaded but also longed to hear. Adrian's gaze scanned the room, but when it landed on her, she could see the depth of emotion that flickered in his eyes. "A few years ago," Adrian continued, his voice steady but filled with a quiet strength, "I thought I had everything. I had success, money, status. But I lacked something far more important. I lacked love. I lacked the one thing that would make all of this truly worthwhile. And that was when I lost someone important to me." Isabella felt the weight of the room shift. All eyes were on Adrian now, and she could feel the electricity in the air, the tension building with every word. This wasn't just about charity anymore. This was about them. "I won't lie," Adrian said, his gaze still locked on Isabella. "I was hurt, and I let that hurt shape who I became. I pushed people away, and I shut myself off from the possibility of real connection. But what I've learned through everything, through all the struggles, the success, and the failures, is that love is the one thing that makes everything else worthwhile." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. This was it. He was doing it. He was acknowledging their past. "Isabella," Adrian continued, his voice softening as he spoke her name. "I know I hurt you, and I know that what I did can't be undone. But in this moment, I want to say that I forgive you. And more than that, I want you to know that I've never stopped caring for you. I've never stopped loving you." The words hung in the air, hanging between them like a delicate thread. And for a moment, the world seemed to stop. The room was silent, as though they were all waiting for her response, waiting for her to confirm what they had all suspected. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward. The weight of his words, the vulnerability in his confession. It was more than she had ever expected. She had spent so many years regretting her decisions, wishing she could turn back time. But now, standing before him, she realized that the past didn't have to define their future. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, and for the first time in a long while, She didn't feel the need to hide. "Adrian," she said, her voice trembling but steady, "I've spent so long regretting what I did. I hurt you, and for that, I will never forgive myself. But I want you to know that I've changed. I've learned the value of love, of what it means to truly care for someone beyond appearances or status. You are the person who matters most to me, and I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but for a chance to show you how much I've grown." The room seemed to hold its breath as Adrian stepped forward, his eyes soft with emotion. "You don't have to ask for forgiveness," he replied, his voice full of warmth and sincerity. "We both made mistakes. But what matters now is that we're here, standing in front of the people who care about us, telling the truth about our feelings." Isabella smiled, a sense of relief washing over her. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And in that moment, as Adrian reached out and took her hand in his, she knew that this was only the beginning of their new story. Together, they would face whatever came next, not as two people haunted by their past, but as two people ready to build a future. The room erupted into applause, the sound of approval and acceptance echoing in her ears. But none of that mattered to Isabella. What mattered was that finally, she and Adrian had both acknowledged the truth. And that was the greatest victory of all. The weeks that followed their public acknowledgement had been a whirlwind of emotions. Adrian and Isabella had spent every moment rebuilding the pieces of their broken relationship, navigating the delicate balance between trust and vulnerability. The road had been long, filled with doubts and fears, but as time went on, they had started to regain the connection they once had. Yet, despite all their efforts, there was still a shadow hanging over them, a lingering fear that one wrong move could undo everything they had worked so hard to rebuild. They had learned to communicate, to share their thoughts and feelings, but deep down, they both knew that true healing would require something more, something deeper than words. It would require trust, the kind of trust that neither of them had truly given to each other before, the kind of trust that would take time to nurture and a lifetime to maintain. "Are you sure about this?" Isabella asked softly, her eyes searching Adrian's face for any sign of hesitation. She could feel the weight of the decision hanging between them, heavy with the consequences of both failure and success. Adrian took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering as he looked at her. The man standing before her was not the same man she had first met. He had changed, grown, and learned from the pain of the past. But he was still human, still vulnerable. "I'm sure," Adrian replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know it won't be easy, but I believe in us. I believe in what we've built. We've come so far, and I don't want to let fear hold us back now." Isabella nodded, though the doubt in her heart refused to be completely silenced. The truth was, she wanted this. She wanted to trust him again, wanted to believe in their love. But the scars from the past were still there, and though they had worked through many of their issues, there was still the lingering question: could they truly trust each other again? Could they let go of the mistakes, the hurt, and the broken promises that had once defined their relationship? The decision before them was monumental. They had both come a long way, but now they were faced with the ultimate test. Would they be able to fully let go of the past and trust each other enough to move forward? Or would the fear of history repeating itself hold them back? That evening, Adrian had invited Isabella to a quiet dinner at one of their favorite restaurants. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was meaningful, an attempt to create a space where they could talk, really talk, about everything that had been left unsaid. The table was set for two, with a simple candle flickering between them. The soft hum of conversation from other diners filled the background, but for Isabella and Adrian, it felt as though the world had faded away. They were alone, sitting across from one another, facing the truth that had yet to be fully addressed. "We've come so far," Isabella said, her voice breaking the silence. "But I can't help but feel like there's something holding me back." Adrian nodded, his eyes dark with understanding. He knew exactly what she meant. I feel it too, he admitted. It's not easy, is it? The past, the things we've both done. It's hard to move past that. Isabella's gaze flickered to the flickering candlelight. I want to believe in us, Adrian. I do. But every time I start to trust you again, I'm afraid of losing everything. What if we're not really ready? What if we're just fooling ourselves? Adrian reached across the table, his hand brushing hers gently. Isabella, I can't promise that there won't be bumps in the road. I can't promise that things will be perfect. But I can promise that I will never hurt you the way I did before. I've learned from my mistakes, and I will do everything in my power to prove that to you. The sincerity in his voice stirred something deep within her. She had wanted this, wanted to believe in him, in them. But the fear, the uncertainty, was still there. The trust had been broken once, and rebuilding it felt like walking a tightrope without a safety net. I want to trust you, Isabella said quietly. But it's hard, Adrian. It's hard to let go of the pain, the fear that you might hurt me again. Adrian squeezed her hand. I understand. But I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to let me show you that I'm not that person anymore. Trust doesn't happen overnight. It's a choice. And I'm asking you to choose me, to choose us, every day, even when it's hard. Isabella looked down at their intertwined hands. The warmth of his touch offered a sense of comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't a magic fix, and it wouldn't erase the past, but in that moment, she realized that trust wasn't about perfection. It was about taking that leap together. It was about showing up for each other, even when the future seemed uncertain. The following weeks were an intense journey of rediscovery. They took things slowly, learning to communicate better, to express their fears and hopes without judgment. There were days when the doubts crept in, when the past reared its ugly head, and they both questioned whether they had made the right decision. But there were also days filled with laughter, moments of tenderness, and a growing sense of intimacy that made them both realize that they were moving in the right direction. Trust wasn't built in a day. It was built in the quiet moments, in the vulnerable conversations, and in the actions that spoke louder than words. There were tests along the way. Moments where Isabella had to trust Adrian with her heart again. Moments where Adrian had to prove that he was worthy of her love and trust. But each time, they both rose to the challenge. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below them, Isabella looked at Adrian with a quiet sense of peace. I think I'm finally starting to trust you again, she said softly, her voice filled with both relief and joy. Adrian smiled, a look of genuine happiness in his eyes. And I'm trusting you too. I don't expect perfection, Isabella. But I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. In that moment, they both knew that the ultimate test wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about choosing each other again. Every single day. The road ahead wasn't guaranteed, and there would be challenges. But as long as they had each other, as long as they could trust in their love, there was nothing they couldn't face together. The air between them had changed. What was once a constant tension, a battle of words and emotions, had softened into something more delicate, something hopeful. The journey they had been on was far from easy. Adrian and Isabella had faced betrayal, pain, and mistrust. They had hurt each other in ways neither of them thought possible, but somewhere along the way, they had learned to heal. They had learned to fight not against each other, but for each other. Now, they were standing at the precipice of something new. The past that had haunted them both for so long was finally beginning to lose its grip. They had fought for their love, but there was one thing they had yet to do: truly let go of the past. They had made strides. They had rebuilt the trust, but the ghosts of their past mistakes still lingered in the shadows, whispering doubts and fears. But today, things felt different. Today they had a chance to truly reconcile. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward with open hearts. Isabella sat at the edge of their shared balcony, looking out at the city as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the air warm with the promise of a new beginning. Adrian walked up beside her, the familiar sound of his footsteps bringing a sense of comfort. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stood beside her, offering her the space she needed to gather her thoughts. For a long time, the silence between them had been uncomfortable, filled with the weight of unspoken words. But now, the silence was different. It was peaceful, and it was theirs. "I've been thinking," Isabella said finally, her voice low but steady, "about everything that's happened between us." Adrian nodded, his gaze never leaving her. "Me too," he admitted. "It feels like we've come so far, but I know we still have a long way to go." Isabella turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. "Do you ever think about the mistakes we've made?" she asked softly. "The things we can never undo?" Adrian's face softened, his expression becoming pensive. "Every day," he said quietly. "But I've learned that we can't change the past. We can't go back and fix what's broken. All we can do is move forward." Isabella nodded, her heart heavy, but also lighter than it had been in a long time. She had lived with guilt for so long. The weight of her past decisions had defined her for too long. But Adrian was right. There was no going back. All they could do was rebuild. "I've been holding on to the past for so long," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I've been afraid that if I let go of it, I would lose everything. But I'm starting to realize that if we want a future together, we have to let go of what happened." Adrian stepped closer, reaching for her hand. "I don't want you to hold on to the past, Isabella. I want us to move forward. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." She squeezed his hand, feeling the sincerity in his words. It was a moment of vulnerability for both of them. They had both hurt each other, but they had also learned from their mistakes. Now, they had to choose to heal, to forgive, to move on. The next few days were filled with quiet reflection, but also with action. Adrian and Isabella spent time together, not just rebuilding their relationship, but also learning how to support each other in new ways. There were still moments of doubt, still moments when the weight of the past seemed too much to bear. But each time they stumbled, they picked each other up, slowly and steadily moving forward. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't instant. There were times when the past seemed too overwhelming, when it felt like they would never escape its grasp. But each time those thoughts crept in, they reminded themselves of one simple truth. They had chosen to be here. They had chosen to fight for their love, to build something new. And that was enough. As they spent time together, Adrian began to open up in ways he hadn't before. He shared with Isabella the pain he had carried, how her rejection had wounded him deeply, how it had made him question his worth. But he also shared his journey of growth, how he had learned to find strength in his self-worth, and how he had transformed his pain into a source of resilience. Isabella listened, her heart aching as she realized just how much Adrian had suffered in silence. "I never knew," she whispered, her eyes filled with regret. "I never knew how much my actions hurt you." Adrian shook his head. "It's in the past now," he said softly. "What matters is that we're here now. We're doing the work to move forward." It was a pivotal moment for both of them, a moment where they both acknowledged the pain, but also the healing potential. They weren't perfect, and they knew they would still face challenges ahead. But for the first time, they were truly on the same page. Together. "I love you, Adrian," Isabella said, her voice filled with emotion. "I love you too," Adrian replied, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "And I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." That night, they made a promise to each other. A promise to forgive, to trust, and to move forward. They knew that reconciliation wasn't an event. It was a process. It would take time, and there would be moments of doubt and fear. But together, they would face it all. The next morning, as they stood hand in hand, looking out over the city, they both felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future, for the love they had fought for, and for the journey ahead. They had reconciled. They had made peace with the past. And now, it was time to build something beautiful. They didn't know exactly what the future held, but they knew one thing for sure. They were ready to face it together, hand in hand, leaving the past behind and embracing the new beginning they had created. After months of navigating the turbulence of their past, Adrian and Isabella finally found themselves in a place of peace, a place where their love had the chance to grow. They had reconciled, but now they had to learn how to rebuild not just trust, but the very foundation of their relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the old wounds resurfaced, when doubts crept in. But this time, they were ready. They were committed to each other, and that commitment was stronger than any obstacle they might face. The new beginning wasn't just about moving on from the past. It was about actively creating a future together, one that was built on trust, understanding, and most of all, love. Adrian and Isabella decided to take things slowly, to rebuild their connection step by step. They spent time together, talking, laughing, and rediscovering what had first brought them together. It was during this time that they realized how much they had grown. What once seemed like a love born out of passion and lust was now rooted in something deeper: mutual respect, vulnerability, and the understanding that neither of them was perfect. They were flawed, but they were willing to grow together. The first few weeks of their new beginning were filled with moments of joy and discovery. They rediscovered each other in ways they had never known before. Adrian, who had once been so closed off, began to open up more. He shared his dreams, his fears, and his past struggles in a way he had never allowed anyone to see. Isabella, too, began to let her guard down. She realized that she had been so focused on her insecurities that she had failed to see the depth of Adrian's pain and growth. With each passing day, their bond grew stronger, more intimate. They learned to communicate openly and to support each other through life's challenges, big and small. The small gestures, the way Adrian would surprise Isabella with her favorite flowers, the way Isabella would prepare his favorite meal after a long day, became symbols of their affection and the new life they were building together. It wasn't about grand romantic gestures, but rather the little things that showed how much they cared. It was these moments that solidified their relationship, transforming it into something real and lasting. They began to dream about the future. They talked about where they saw themselves in 5 years and 10 years. They discussed their hopes, their goals, and how they could support each other in achieving them. Adrian shared his desire to expand his business and to make a real impact in the world, and Isabella supported him wholeheartedly. She shared her dreams of traveling, of experiencing the world beyond the confines of their city, and Adrian encouraged her to pursue her passions. They were no longer two people simply trying to make things work. They were partners, building a life together. Their friends and family noticed the change too. Isabella's parents, who had once been skeptical of Adrian, saw how much he had transformed, how much he had grown, and they welcomed him into their lives with open arms. Adrian's friends, who had always been there for him, saw the happiness Isabella brought into his life, and they couldn't be happier for him. It wasn't just about them anymore. Their relationship had ripples that extended outwards, affecting everyone around them. But the real test came when they had to face external pressures. Life, as always, threw challenges their way. Adrian's business grew, but with success came new responsibilities. There were long hours, constant stress, and moments of doubt. Isabella, too, faced her struggles, with her career demanding more of her time and energy. There were moments when they felt the weight of the world on their shoulders, but they never let it tear them apart. They learned to lean on each other in times of stress and to communicate when things became overwhelming. They had learned that love wasn't just about the good times, It was about how you supported each other during the tough times. Their love had been tested before, but this time, it was different. This time, they were a team, and together, they could face anything. As their relationship blossomed, so did their individual lives. Adrian's business flourished, but it was no longer just about success for him. It was about creating something meaningful, something that could provide for others, something that would make a difference. He felt fulfilled, knowing that his work was contributing to a greater purpose. Isabella, too, found her sense of fulfillment. She was no longer just the woman who had been swept up in a whirlwind romance. She was a woman with her dreams, her career, and her sense of purpose. And Adrian supported her every step of the way. They celebrated each other's victories, no matter how big or small. It was during a quiet evening at home, after a particularly hectic day, that Adrian turned to Isabella and said, "You know, we've been through a lot together. But I think the best part of all of this is how we've changed, how we've grown, how we've become a team." Isabella smiled, feeling the weight of his words. She had always known that Adrian was special, but now she saw him in a new light, a man who was not just successful, but someone who had the capacity for real growth, for real love. "I never thought we would get here," she admitted softly, "but I'm so glad we did." Adrian leaned in, kissing her forehead gently. "Me too," he whispered. "Me too." And with that, they both knew that their new beginning wasn't just a chapter in their love story. It was the start of something even more beautiful. As the days went on, their relationship continued to blossom. They faced challenges, yes, but they faced them together. They learned, they grew, and most importantly, they loved. And in that love, they found a peace and happiness they never thought possible. Their relationship was no longer a battle to overcome. It was a partnership, a union of two people who had come together through struggle and had emerged stronger, more united than ever. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Adrian and Isabella felt ready for whatever it might bring. Because they knew one thing for sure. They were in this together. And together, they could face anything. After all the emotional turmoil they had been through, Adrian knew he had to do something grand to win Isabella's heart once again. He had been through the ups and downs of their relationship, and now, more than ever, he realized how much she meant to him. Every moment without her had felt like a lifetime. Adrian couldn't just sit back and let their love slip away. He had to prove to Isabella that his love for her was unwavering, that he was willing to fight for their future, and that he was willing to go to any length to make up for his past mistakes. It wasn't just about grand gestures for the sake of it. It was about showing her that he understood what he had lost, how much she truly meant to him, and how far he would go to make things right. Isabella, on the other hand, had always been practical and cautious. She wasn't someone who easily fell for extravagant displays of affection, and she had been hurt in the past. But there was something different about Adrian. Despite all the pain and confusion, he had always remained a part of her heart. She couldn't deny it, no matter how hard she tried. Still, she was hesitant. She didn't want to get her hopes up, not after everything they had been through. She had seen his flaws, and she had seen his growth. But could she truly trust that things would be different this time? Could she allow herself to be vulnerable again? Adrian spent days planning the perfect gesture. He thought about everything they had been through and what would truly touch Isabella's heart. It wasn't just about giving her something material. It wasn't about showing off. It was about speaking to her heart in a way that words alone couldn't. He decided to do something that would be both personal and meaningful. Something that would remind her of their journey, of the love they shared, and of the dreams they had for the future. Adrian knew Isabella loved art, and he had never fully understood her passion for it. But he had come to realize that it was a part of who she was. It was something that had always brought her joy, and he knew that it was time to show her that he cared about the things that mattered to her, not just the things that mattered to him. He contacted a renowned artist to create a piece that captured the essence of their journey. Everything they had been through, all the highs and lows, the moments of doubt, the moments of love, and the moments of growth. It wasn't just a painting. It was a representation of everything they had overcome and everything they had become. When the painting was ready, Adrian made sure to plan a special evening. He invited Isabella to a private art gallery where the piece would be unveiled. He had arranged everything: candles, soft music, and the perfect ambiance. He wanted the moment to be magical, to be one she would never forget. Isabella was curious, unsure of what to expect. When she walked into the gallery, her eyes were immediately drawn to the center of the room where the painting was displayed. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was emotional. It was a piece that captured not just the beauty of their love, but also the struggles they had faced, the lessons they had learned, and the strength they had gained from each other. As she stood there taking in the painting, Adrian walked up behind her. "Isabella," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've made mistakes, but I want you to know that I am so sorry. I'm sorry for the times I took you for granted, for the times I didn't appreciate you the way I should have. But most of all, I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough. Because you are more than enough. You've always been enough." Isabella turned to face him, her eyes filled with emotion. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the rawness of his words. "Adrian," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been so scared. I've been scared to trust you again, scared to let myself be vulnerable. But you've shown me time and time again that you've changed, that you've grown. I'm not sure I can forget everything that's happened, but I want to try. I want to believe in us again." Adrian reached out and took her hands in his. "Isabella, I'll spend every day for the rest of my life making it up to you. I'll show you every day how much you mean to me, because I love you, and I don't want to lose you." The room was silent for a moment, and then Isabella smiled. It wasn't just a smile of acceptance, it was a smile of understanding. She knew that love wasn't just about the grand gestures. It was about the everyday moments, the quiet moments, the moments when they stood by each other through everything. "I believe in you, Adrian," she said softly. "I believe in us." The two of them stood there, looking at the painting that represented their journey, the love that had endured, and the future they had yet to create. It wasn't a perfect love. It wasn't a flawless relationship. But it was real, and it was worth fighting for. Adrian's grand gesture hadn't just won Isabella's heart back. It had reminded her of why she fell in love with him in the first place. He wasn't perfect, but he was willing to try. And that was all she needed. They embraced, the weight of the past finally lifting from their shoulders. As they held each other, they knew that no matter what challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. Their love had been tested, but it had survived. And with that, a new chapter in their story began, one where they would continue to grow, to love, and to build the life they both dreamed of. The grand gesture had worked. But it wasn't just the gesture that mattered. It was the love behind it, the sincerity, and the willingness to change. Adrian had proven that he was ready to fight for their future, and Isabella had proven that love, when given the chance, could heal even the deepest of wounds. After everything they had been through, Adrian and Isabella stood at a crossroads. Their journey had been long, filled with twists and turns, but they had finally found their way back to each other. It was a story of love, regret, growth, and redemption, one that had captured the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. But now, as they faced the future together, there was one final question that lingered in the air. Would their love last? Would they be able to truly build the life they had both dreamed of? Or would the weight of the past hold them back? This question wasn't just for them. It was for everyone watching their story unfold. Everyone who had seen their ups and downs, their struggles and triumphs. Everyone who had witnessed the emotional roller coaster that had led to this moment. The question was simple. Would you have done the same? Would you have fought for love despite all the obstacles? Would you have made the same choices they made? Would you have had the courage to go back, to admit your mistakes, to show someone that you were willing to change, and to prove that love is worth fighting for? For Adrian, the decision was clear. He had been through the darkest parts of his life. He had felt the pain of rejection, the sting of loss, and the weight of regret. But in the end, he knew that love was worth fighting for. No matter how hard it got, no matter how many times he stumbled, he was willing to try again. He had learned from his mistakes, he had grown as a person, and he had realized that love wasn't just about the good times. It was about sticking together through the tough times and supporting each other through everything life threw at them. Isabella, too, had faced her own internal struggle. She had been scared to trust Adrian again. She had been afraid of getting hurt, of opening her heart once more. But in the end, she chose to believe in him. She chose to believe in their love, in the person he had become, and in the future they could have together. She realized that love wasn't about perfection. It was about acceptance, understanding, and commitment. Now, as they stood hand in hand facing the world together, they wanted to hear from you. They wanted to know if you would have done the same thing. Would you have been brave enough to forgive? Would you have taken that leap of faith, even when the odds seemed stacked against you? Would you have believed in love, despite all the pain and uncertainty? The story of Adrian and Isabella is a story that many of us can relate to. It's about overcoming challenges, facing our fears, and choosing love even when it seems like the easier choice is to walk away. It's about growth, redemption, and the power of second chances. So, we want to hear from you. What would you have done in their shoes? Would you have chosen to forgive and try again? Or would you have walked away and let go of the past? Would you have fought for love, just like Adrian did? Or would you have been too afraid to risk it all? This is your chance to share your thoughts and experiences. Would you have had the courage to go after your own happily ever after, just like they did? What would you have done if you were in their place? We want to hear your opinions, your stories, and your perspective. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to decide between love and pride, between forgiveness and holding on to the past, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you ever regret the decisions you made? Or did you find that the choices you made led you to a place of growth and understanding? Adrian and Isabella's story isn't just theirs. It's a story for anyone who has ever faced the challenges of love, regret, and redemption. It's a reminder that love is not always easy, but it's always worth it. So, what would you have done? Would you have chosen to fight for love, or would you have let go? Let us know in the comments below. As you think about your own journey, remember this. True love is not about perfection. It's about choosing each other despite everything else. It's about being willing to grow, to learn, and to fight for what matters most. Adrian and Isabella's story is a testament to that, and we hope it inspires you to believe in second chances, to trust in the power of love, and to never give up on what truly matters.